Welcome back to Hear Me Out.
Hello.
With Kez and with Lula. Today, we're going to talk about
a little bit of our testimonies. I know that you probably got tired of us from the first episode where we just talked about us.
Kind of heavy.
But, our first episode where we just talked about us.
Yes.
Yeah, but our previous episode, it's a very good episode. I feel like we still talked about us, but we managed to do it in a way that hopefully helps people.
Right.
But today we're also trying to make it so whatever we say in our testimony can be of impact in your life. Obviously, we're not over here with like, oh my God, I want you to hear me out so you can just, be uplifted and you can, but we do believe in the power of testimonies because I've experienced in my life testimonies that I wouldn't say that have changed my life, but they changed my perspective on something.
Right.
And I think when we share, our experiences and our testimonies, we're not expecting for people to change their lives. We're expecting that perhaps it can make you think of or see something differently. See God. See that way you see God. See that way you see your own relationship with God differently. So that's our goal today for us to share a little bit of how we came to Christ and how we came to a relationship with Him and how easy or difficult that might have been. Right? Do you want to start?
Sure. For me, I think first and foremost, if you've to go a little touch on testimonies, if you don't know what a testimony is, it's basically an account of how you came to Christ, how you came to Jesus. So if you've heard that word for the first time, that's basically what it is. Or if you hear it in a setting of like the court, like this person's testimony, it's basically how you came, to Jesus. For me, my journey started from birth because I grew up in a Christian home. It's what was instilled in me from very young. And for those of you church kids out there that grew up like me, I grew up in a home where like all that I was allowed to watch was like Cedarmont Kids, which is basically Cocomelon for like Christian kids, and it's just kids singing along different places, just Christian songs, and that's it. And VeggieTales, shout out to anybody who watched VeggieTales. It is literally a bunch of vegetables talking about Jesus and
creating biblical stories.
Recreating biblical stories. So that's that was early on. But yeah, I grew up with both of my parents coming into my room every single night. Reading the Bible, which would be the Reina Valera. If you don't know what that is, it's basically the or not ancient, I should say, but it's the old one of the oldest versions of the Bible in Spanish. So my sister and I, we were both like, I was maybe 7 or 6 and she was 14 or 15. And I remember like my mom would sit there with her glasses and my dad would have his Bible and they're reading, like Isaías or something, like something really, in depth. And my sister and I obviously were kids, so we're very much just like playing, and my mom would like look at us from her glasses and she'd be like, "Pon reverencia," and then we would just be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, like we're paying attention," but we didn't know what they were saying. I grew up sleeping under the pews. It was a norm to me to go up to church and to say a verse and to sing a song with the rest of the kids and to go to Sunday school. So already my perception of the world was very much from Christian eyes. I believed in God and I really, even though I was a child, like I really believed that He was real, and my parents did a good job in instilling love for God, because I remember I was again like 8 or 9. I was a weird kid. I remember I would like hug my pillow and I'd be like, "God, like if you're real, I just want you to hug me back. Like I can't wait till like I meet you one day." I was really like asking,
to go with
no, I asked to go. You have no idea how many times. So I grew up in that.
Take the wheel,
Jesus. I grew up in that, and then we moved to our current church, and then there was a lot more kids, because where we grew up there wasn't that many kids, but now there was there was like literally like there was children's ministry, and there was junior high ministry, and there was youth ministry, and so we had like literally camps every year for kids. And so that was a new thing. Oh, we're gonna go to junior camp, and we're gonna worship God, and literally that's all that it is. It's a camp, and they have activities, but they had services, and they had worship nights, and I remember being 10, 11, going to these services, going to these camps. And around that time, I was 12, out of nowhere, perfect, happily Christian child, went into a severe depression. I was 12, and I remember I used to write a lot in my diaries, and I used to just question, like, why am I here? And I would really have these really in-depth questions, like, am I like a character? Like I would really ask myself, like, I'm living life through my eyes, and like no one is living life through my perspective. And like, why am I here, and how did I come alive, and what's gonna happen if I die, and why was I put on this earth? Do I have a purpose? Like, there were these really deep questions. And I was 12, and I remember it got to the point where I was depressed. I couldn't fathom these kinds of questions, that it came to a point where I'm like, there's no point, or there's no point to living. I don't know, like I couldn't handle it. And I remember I started feeling a lot of suicidal thoughts. I started to question living. I mean, I didn't have anything traumatic up until that point happen to me that would, like bullying or anything, that would make me want to end my life. And I remember telling my mom about it, and she was very much like, Mia, this doesn't make any sense. You know that God loves you, and and God has a purpose for you. But what's my purpose? Like, why am I here? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I kept wrestling that, and it was a very scary time, because I was a child. And even I think for my parents, it was like, we don't understand why our very happy little girl doesn't want to live anymore, So I was going through that for a while. And as cheesy as it sounds, I know that I'm going to sound like one of those like stereotypical Christians. I saw Jesus on a cheese platter or something, and I knew he was talking to me. Like, okay, yeah, I had a similar experience, I don't know if you've ever seen, like, I saw Jesus on a Dorito chip, when he was talking to me. So, yeah, literally, like, all of a sudden. No, I remember, I was going through this whole thing. My mom was taking me to pastor, and he was talking to me, and he just kept saying, like, God has a calling in your life, and the enemy is trying to destroy that. The enemy is after you, in a sense, that, you are meant to be here, but, you're having these questions because it's the enemy's trying to destroy your purpose. But even as a child, that was still very complex for me to understand. And in my head, it's like, okay, now there's something after me, So I remember I was in the car with my sister, and she had a youth event, and I stayed in the car, and I was playing her CDs. And she had this CD from Jeff Dio. The album was called Saturate, or Saturate. And there was a song that came up that was called Satisfy. And in the song, the singer is saying, my heart has grown so cold. My heart has turned away from you. My heart has gone to other things but you. And then it gets to the chorus, and he's singing, I want to be free. I want to be free, Jesus. I want to be satisfied in you and you alone. And I remember singing the song, hearing the song, and just crying. Mm-hmm. And it was so weird. But at that point, I like to believe that even though I was young, and even though I was very immature and very naive to the reality of life, I understood one thing. And I understood that the truth of the matter is, at least in my life, there really is no point to living unless it's for God. Mm. That was the truth that I got. And in that's what I clung to. Mm-hmm. I clung to, I'm never going to find the answer to that. because everything in my life will always be lacking, you know, people or friends or family or your spouse. You're never going to be fully fulfilled. So then that means that the only thing that can really keep me from ending my life or finding no hope and no purpose for me is Jesus. That was it. And so I remember I was like something broke within me, and I stopped feeling what I was feeling. I stopped having suicidal thoughts, and I told my mom, I want to get baptized. And I remember, you know, even my sister was like, are you sure? You know, you're kind of young. And you know, hasta eso that, you know, my parents, they always brought us up to have choice. You know, I grew up in a different way. And so there was a lot of things that my mom was like, if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to do that, like, that's fine. I want you to come to terms that this is your conviction. This is your decision for doing X, Y, and Z. And when it came to getting baptized, I was like, no, I want to. And they were still kind of like, are you sure? So they had me, there was a brother in the church that gave me Bible studies. And he was trying to teach me on the severity of this decision, you know, and it wasn't to discourage me. It was more of just like, you have to understand that you're really young, you know, and this is a commitment for life, and you're committing to something that, do you really understand what it means? And they couldn't get through me. I was like, yes, I understand. So lo and behold, I got baptized at the age of 12. It was April 27th, 2008. I've been baptized for 14 years.
Wow.
And that was the start. Now, it's all cookie cutter then, right? And it seems like, oh, she's a great person, and, you know, she loves Jesus. You know, like any person, I grew up. I became a teenager. I started liking boys. I started, you know, having friends. I started, like, a lot of my life changed. And so God and church weren't really my priority. I mean, I was always going to church. I was always involved. I went to services. But if I'm honest, yeah, like when we went to youth camps, my goal wasn't always, oh, Jesus, let me encounter you. Let me have a moment with you. It was like, okay, who's that brother over there? I mean, I say this story all the time. I remember this was a youth camp, and I was right there. I was raising my hands, and I'm worshiping, and there's this very attractive, very attractive bass player, right? And this is at a youth camp worship night. And I'm just like praying, but like at the same time, like looking at him and just kind of like, Jesus, you know, you can have my husband for me someday. And if you want that one's okay. And I remember, because I was crying, you know, I'm praying. I'm just like, Jesus, you know, praying, and I'm speaking in tongues. I remember that. I don't know if you guys have, this has ever happened to you. If you're really like praying and you're really going in, and especially if you're speaking in tongues, you're not swallowing. So I'm just like talking and not really like swallowing, and so I'm collecting phlegm. And so yeah, I literally was just like, oh, you know, just Jesus. And then all of a sudden I felt like I needed to cough because I hadn't swallowed, and I literally was like, and I started coughing, and literally like I just went, like all my loogie was in my hand. Homeboy was just like, I'm gonna look over there. I was mortified. I was literally like, oh my God, there goes my future husband, you know. And so literally, like I say this to say that, you know, for years, you know, my relationship with God was a little superficial, because all that I really wanted was, I want to be in a relationship. I want to have a boyfriend. You know, I'm going to put myself at the front so that he can see me, that I love Jesus and I'm all faithful. And I went through that.
Hold on. Before she continues, you have no idea how many times I've heard this story, and it makes me crack up every single time.
It was embarrassing. It was horrible. So, you know, 16, 17, 18, I was in the worship team. I was a junior teacher or youth teacher. I was doing life groups. I did a lot of different ministries, to the point that ministry was life, you know, like all I do was ministry. And I remember in high school, I had a lot of conflicts with friends, because they were like, you know, like, dude, like, that's all you do. Like, all you do is church, just church, just church, just church. And you know, one of my best friends, like, she's like, we're gonna go to Disneyland on Saturday. And I was like, oh, well, Saturday we're having you know, a youth service. And she's like, well, can't you cancel, you know? And so I had a lot of that. Like, they really couldn't understand why church was life for me, you know? And even though church was life, I wouldn't say Jesus was life for me. You know, it wasn't like I was living the holiest of holiest lives. You know, we were all teenagers. We've all, you know, had our own experiences, whatever that means to you. And so I definitely wasn't the model person for a lot of things, but I still knew in me, because it was ingrained in me, you know, God is first, you know, and so by default, church is first. So to this day, it's one of my regrets, but to this day, I don't have any contact with a lot of people from high school. I always see that kind of as a missed opportunity, because I didn't really open up about why I believed in what I believed, because it was superficial, if that makes sense. So in a way, it was like, why am I going to talk to them about Jesus when I'm not even all into Jesus, you know? And so I went through that. And in college, it really started to shift. It was more of like, okay, you know, I'm starting to get more involved, and now it's like, where's my life really going? And I think that's when even more I was challenged with a lot of different things, a lot of different struggles. And I really became a professional in playing church, you know? And to the world, I was like holy or saint or whatever you want to call it. You know, I was very in church, and I carried this reputation of like, la hermana Kesia. You know, Dios la usa. You know, because I was always involved, and I was always very much like, yeah, I'll do a youth class, and yeah, I'll do a junior class, and yeah, I'll be involved. And I've never had I've not had much difficulty in public speaking, and so they'd see me give a lesson, or they'd see me do a conference or different things. But deep down, I was so far away from God. You know, I wasn't reading. I wasn't praying. I wasn't consecrating myself. What does consecrating mean? Basically, you know, devoting yourself deeply to, you know, spiritual things. And so I was great at pretending. Very, very great at pretending. And I remember there were a lot of times that I could be up there in service, and I would pray, and I would ask God, like, God, help me. God, change me. God, I mean, there were so many times that I remember praying, like, God, like, I want to do good, but I can't. Like, I can't. And everyone thinks I'm a certain way, and I'm not. Like, you know, even my family thinks I'm a certain way, because all I've ever done is church. All I've ever done is play the part. All I've ever done is what all the Christian kids do, which is go to camp and do the right thing and blah, blah, blah. And it was in those years that, you know, I really struggled. I really struggled with my values. I struggled with my relationship with God, because again, on Sunday I'd be a certain way, and in private I was very different. And to everyone, you know, I was okay. And there were a lot of times that I wrestled with that. You know, I wasn't like, I'm faking it, like I'm trying to fool people. It was more of just like, I'm not being consistent. And so therefore, you know, I felt guilty, you know, trying to help someone or trying to be there for someone, when deep down I knew, it's like, if you only knew, you know, I'm drowning here, you know, like I'm not what you think I am, and I'm struggling just as much as you, but because you've put me on a pedestal, and I've allowed people to put me on a pedestal, I'll play the part and I'll act like I'm helpful, but I'm not.
And we like being put on a pedestal.
Exactly.
I think it's go back to reputation. You know, you want to have a good reputation. But reputation and testimony are two different things.
Very, very different things. And so, you know, I continued on with that, and I met my husband. And so, you know, a lot of that was like, okay, this is the first time I've met someone that I actually want to marry. You know, before that, yes, of course, you know, I had, you know, crushes, I had experiences where I met people or talked to people, but it was always like, you know, I want the attention, you know, I just want to flirt, or I know this is shocking, but it's the truth, you know, like I didn't want anything serious, and I just wanted to be like, oh, what's this about, you know? So finally I meet, the man that I'm going to marry, and I'm like, this is serious, like I have to really buckle down and be a woman, and with that, I should be a woman of faith, right? I always told myself that when that phase or that season came into my life, that I had imagined I was going to be this very faith-filled woman. I was going to be honoring God. I was going to be making all the right decisions, and here he is, and I'm not that. I'm not all that I thought I would be, right. and I'm very imperfect. And I like to add, prior to this, I used to be very proud, because of my reputation. I judged a lot of people. I used to be very much like, oh my God, like how could you struggle with that? Like how could you fall into that? At this stage in my life, I was very different. I was very much like, I've screwed up too, I've made mistakes too, and who am I to judge someone else, so in a way there was a good thing, not to condone bad behavior or sin in any kind of way, but it definitely did make me fall off my high horse. And so as I'm getting ready to make this commitment to my husband, I definitely tried to be more of a good Christian, or to be more of a consistent Christian. I definitely don't think I was perfect. I definitely think I did everything the right way, but I knew how severe, or rather I knew how serious this new phase in my life was going to be. And so I really struggled with like trying to be honoring of God. Then we got married, and all of this good is happening. And with that, when I say struggle, I mean like, okay, you want to serve God, but your priority is like you're in love, and I'm with Joel right now. You're like, I just want to be with Joel, and then I gotta serve Jesus. And then, oh my God, like he texts me right now, this is so cute, and going back and forth. And then you're planning a wedding. I don't care how much you love Jesus and how great you are, but like it was hard to really put God as my priority during that time, because I was like, I'm planning a wedding, and then, oh my God, we have a pandemic, and now we can't go on our honeymoon, and oh my gosh, now we lost our venue because of the pandemic. And so definitely struggled. And because of that, I don't think my relationship with God was set, So we get married. Now he's mine, I'm his. And, I'm so happy, I'm so excited. But at the same time, I feel like that was really the time that I had to make a decision to have faith and to have, like, in other words, up until this point, this is what we do in this house. Sundays is for church. Wednesdays is for church. In this house, literally until the last day that I got married, Mom and Dad are going to go in, and we're all going to we're going to read together, little things. There's an earthquake, vamos a orar, like, and everything, like in my family, I remember, even though Joel grew up Christian, I remember for like our New Year's or things like that, and we'd all be singing. He's like, oh wow, like you guys sing on your New Year's and stuff like that, Christian songs. So I now I'm in my home, and now it's up to me. Obviously my husband, he's Christian, and he believes in God, and he loves God. But just because you grew up Christian, which, you'll hear, Lula's side, doesn't mean that your experience is exactly the same. And because of that, I realized like, oh, okay, so not that my husband doesn't want to go to church or anything, but it's like, if I allow for my home to not be a Christian home, it won't be a Christian home. Does that make sense? And so it was now up to me. Am I de parte mía, me voy a levantar a las 5 de la mañana a orar o no? Am I going to read? Am I really going to study? Am I going to be my mom and dad and go into my room, and we're going to pray together, and we're going to read together? And I'll confess, the first couple months, I didn't, because again, you're in your life, and this is new seasons, and I'm married, and I have my house, and I'm cleaning, I'm cooking, I'm doing my thing. Oh yes, we gotta pray, and do that. And then Daddy died, and my faith was tested, because it was the first time I had ever gone through something really difficult. It was the first time I ever really had to work past my emotions
Mm-hmm.
and pray because I knew it was the right thing to do, as opposed to I feel like I want to pray.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I wanted to pray. I didn't feel like I wanted to seek God. If anything, because up until this point, I've had a very superficial relationship with God, I wasn't spiritually strong. I wasn't spiritually ready to handle all that came with losing my father,
Right.
who was in many ways my foundation for my spiritual life. He was disabled, and because of that, I didn't grow up with a father that was, strong. He'd put me on his shoulders, or he'd come home from work and está cansado. That wasn't my experience. My experience with my dad was, in a way, we take care of daddy, like he's the one that we have to look after, and he walks a little slower, and so we have to walk a little slower. But if there's one thing that dad was solid in, porque even in ese tiempo mi papá se le olvidaba las cosas.
Mm-hmm.
And because of his condition, he had MS, multiple sclerosis. It was a condition that affected his nervous system. And so he regained a lot of his motor skills, but he struggled with walking. That's why he always had a walker. He didn't have good stabilization in his hands, so even his riding was very off. And because of that, sometimes like you'd have a conversation with him, and he'd either, forget what you guys were talking about, or he'd, go on a different tangent, or he couldn't always pick up on certain things, because of what happened, And that was really interesting to grow up with, but it was interesting. If I was like, Dad, what does the Bible say about this? Oh, look up Matthew 23, verse 2. This man knew. He knew. Like, I there were so many times, like, I was experiencing anxiety or fear. He'd send me an email because that was the only way that he could actually write something, like, organized, because he couldn't write. And he'd give me all the scriptures on fear, on anxiety. He'd write preachings on his Facebook wall, and he'd always be, researching things. And so as much as, he may have struggled in those areas, like, to communicate, for some reason when it came to God, it was like, it was his one source of strength. Mm-hmm. And I remember, like, I remember feeling Dad pray for me, and I would feel peace. I would feel like I'm okay. So as much as he wasn't physically strong, I felt like he was a rock. And when he passed away, I felt like I lost my rock. I don't want to cry. And so with that, it was really hard for me to seek God when I felt like the one person that would always help me through some of, my struggles or my situations wasn't there. Like, I can't call Daddy on how do you deal with grief, Daddy, because, he wasn't there. And it was the first time that I really went through a process where I had to really decide, I'm going to pray because I want to. I'm going to have faith because I want to. I want to seek God because I want to. It doesn't invalidate my childhood or my upbringing. It just means that for the first time, I recognized what it meant to really commit myself to God.
Wow.
And in my grief, in my pain, I pushed past what felt comfortable, and I did what should have been done by an adult woman. Aunque no lo siento, aunque las cosas no estén bien, aunque mi vida no esté perfecta, yo te voy a buscar, Dios. Yo me voy a aferrar a ti. I had always heard my mom use that word, me voy a aferrar a Dios. It's basically like you're going to cling to God, And I had always been like, why? Like, what does that mean? For the first time, yo me aferré a Dios.
You learned what that was.
I learned what that meant. I learned what it meant to pray in my room. I learned what it meant to, babe, we need to pray right now. And I remember even Joel and I, our relationship, it definitely grew because I remember, I started to be able to identify what it meant to have spiritual warfare. There were times I wake up and I'm like, babe, we need to pray. and we'd start praying, and I'd start speaking in tongues, and I'd start praying and rebuking over my home, rebuking over my marriage, my family, for the first time as a representative of my family. Not someone else is praying for me,
you.
not someone else is fighting a battle for me. It's me. This is my home. And como we've always heard, las hermanas, el enemigo no tiene parte ni suerte en mi vida, en mi hogar, en mi matrimonio. And so I don't like to use the word all the time, because of its meaning sometimes in today's age, but I felt for the first time empowered. I felt like for the first time that God was with me. He wasn't with my dad. He wasn't with my mom. He wasn't even necessarily with my husband, because it's his own thing. It was God's with me. God, he can be my God, and it was the first time that I actually depended on him, and I felt secure in him, and I didn't feel like I can't come to him without someone else representing me. It was like that broke. And it's not that my parents did wrong. It was more like I became an adult. I grew up, and I changed in the way that I handled my spiritual life. And so today, I'm not perfect by any means. I make so many mistakes, especially with my tongue. I ramble. I say way too much, and I've had my foot in my mouth so many times. And I don't know how my life is going to look like, but at least for now and where I'm at, I can honestly say that I'm for the first time officially secure in my faith. And I believe that there is a God. I believe that he has a purpose for me. I believe that, especially now that I'm married and that I have an amazing husband, that's not what fulfills me. It's a joy. It's something that, yes, I do wake up to, and I love, and I see him, and I'm very happy. But if Joel wasn't here tomorrow, God forbid, would my life stop? No, I can't. I have to have a greater reason why I'm on this earth. And it has to be, for me at least, Jesus. It has to be that. And so for me, for the first time, I feel like in my life, I've actually shared my testimony. And actually, when I say I'm doing good, I'm doing good. I'm not lying. There's truth to it. I'm not pretending. And again, like I said, it doesn't mean that I'm not going through things. I mean, if for those of you that go to church with me, or me a little bit better, I haven't been in ministry for a very long time. After Dad passed away, I let go a lot of things, and I know a lot of people, they feel like that's a little weird because they've seen me in ministry for so long, and why isn't she serving, and why isn't she up there, or whatever. But during this process, I made a commitment to myself, and I told myself that I did not want to serve in a ministry if I wasn't being genuine. And I know the skills that I have, and I know that maybe I could help a ministry, maybe I could help an area. But what good is it to do that if I'm not okay, if I'm not really connecting myself to God? And it doesn't mean you have to be perfect to be in ministry. I guess just for me, because for years I was doing that. For years I was pretending. And deep down, being a leader sometimes has its cons in a way, because people look up to you and people expect you to behave a certain way. It's very hard to be vulnerable. It's very hard to be real, of like, I'm struggling too, and in a way, since I've taken kind of a break from that, it's given me more time to really invest on my own time with God. Yesterday, it's probably like not even a big deal, but for me it's a big deal. I finished the Bible for the first time. It took me 2 years. I started in January 1st, 2020, and I ended July 16, 2022. I was 24 when I started. Now I'm 26. And this might sound so bad to hear of me, but it's the first time I've started something and I finished it. And that was a huge deal. because I want this year, that's my goal. I want to be a consistent person. I want to be a genuine person, and I want to seek God not because I have to, not because someone is telling me that if I don't do it, I'm going to go to hell. I want to do it because it nace de mí, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, short, sweet, and simple, not very short. That is my testimony, and definitely keep praying for me. And you know, if you grew up in church and you had that experience, it's definitely a long journey, but I definitely encourage whoever's listening, if you have a relationship with God, question yourself if it's really because you have it, you want it, or if it's because of, you know, someone else. Because when you do it for personal reasons, like you're actually seeking God because you want to, everything changes. It's a completely different relationship.
It does. It should be. It really should be, because that's why we have free will, right? Wow. Well,
Your turn.
my turn. Well, definitely. I also grew up in church. I wasn't born in church. My mom converted when I was 4. I don't know how old she was, but when I was 4, and so from then on we grew up in church. All of my family is Christian, except for like maybe one tío, but we're getting through to him. And another tía, I think she's not Christian. But other than that, like I have ministers in my family. I have pastors in my family. So yeah, definitely I grew up in an environment where wherever I went, I was encountered with God, or the Bible, or you know. However, as you heard from last episode, when I was a child, I would say this. I feel like I had many encounters with God as a child, and I was very in love with Him. I was, for those that might not be Christian, using the word in love, you know, because it really is like that. You know, God, like the Bible says, your first love. Right. So I had a relationship with God when I was a child, around like, I would say 8 to around 11 years, 12. You know, we were at some point we were the only children in our mission, because we moved from a big church to a mission, which is a smaller church, you know, a church that's barely starting. So we were a few children, and so because it was a very small community in the church, we all push each other to, you know, sing and to learn verses and to, you know, go up to the stage and say a moment of grace, or say a verse, or you know, teníamos vigilias, and yes, I can resonate with, like, I used to sleep underneath the chairs as well. You know, man, we used to have so many vigilias, and it was like, oh my God, you know, as a child you want to go home, you want to sleep in a warm bed or something, but at the same time, because we would do it so often, it's like, okay, this is what it is, you know. And we knew which pews were not as hard as the others, and well, for us as a mission, we lack a lot of things, so we would literally just sometimes just fall on the floor. But unlike you, I think instead of when we came to the U.S., we started going to Revive Community Church. Back then, it was Oxnard Revival Center, and I didn't feel connected to the church. I didn't feel. I feel like Kelly, my younger sister, I feel like she blended a lot better than I did. I think a lot in part because of her personality, and also the same thing worked for me. Because of my personality, I didn't really click, and I didn't really like mingled with other children my age. So I think that's a huge part as to why I didn't feel like I belonged.
Right.
So for a lot of years, I just went to Sunday services because my family brought me to Sunday services. I feel like I lost that type of relationship with God. And then obviously we had a whole language barrier. You know, obviously services are still in Spanish, but even the Spanish was a little bit different sometimes. And so that I think for so many years, well, not so many years, but for a couple years after we moved to the US, I didn't feel connected to the church, to the kids, or to God. And I think once I hit high school, and due to a psychology class I took, I realized I had experienced a lot of other things that I had put in my on my subconscious. And I realized that I had experienced very dark things as a child. So that only made it worse.
Right.
My relationship with God, in my relationship with the church, on that, realizing that, thanks to this psychology class, only put me in a more miserable state. And as I mentioned last episode, I was a miserable teenager. What I didn't mention last episode is that I didn't want anything to do with God. I didn't want anything to do with the church.
Yeah.
So all my high school years, yes, we would go, not as often. I wouldn't go a lot. And I think, but whenever I would go, it was with this attitude of like, I don't want to be here.
Right.
And so when I like I said on the previous episode, when I became very cynical about the world, about people, I also became very cynical about God. I also became very like, well, I can't really have a relationship with someone that would allow a child to experience X, Y, and Z. Okay. So to me, that's how I started seeing God. I started seeing God as like, okay, he allowed that to happen, so he must be just as evil as these people or whatever. And so I became very detached, just as I was detached from people and from really how wonderful the world can be. I was also detached from God, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't want anything to do with the church. And then back then, my mom, she still does. You should go. She has a stand at the swap meet, in the Oxnard swap meet. So back then, she had a stand at the swap meet on Sundays. So for me, it worked out perfectly. For me, it's like, I'm gonna go help my mom. I don't have to go to church. Yeah. So for so many years, I didn't go to church because I had to help my mom, and I didn't have to. I'm pretty sure had I told my mom, hey mom, like I want to go to church, I'm pretty sure my mom would have been, go. But it was just my excuse, and it was a perfect excuse for me to be like, I can't, and I was gonna say something and it slipped my mind. Oh yeah, and it's very interesting because, for example, right now at church, there's a lot of somewhat new people that they've told me, I've been here longer than you have, and in my head it's like, no, you haven't. In my head it's like, no, I grew up here. I grew up since I was 12. They're like, really? Where were you? I'm like, lost.
That's not me.
Lost. And so so then I took but however, I would say this, I feel like throughout my life, God was always calling me, and I just didn't want to listen. Because like I said on my previous on the previous episode, I attempted a suicide once, and God prevented that. I 100% believe that God used this person to talk to that person didn't even talk to me. She handed me a note, and in the note it said, I know someone, I don't know you, but I know someone that loves you, and he gave his life for you. And at the end it says Jesus Christ. I'm like, oh my goodness, so I end up crying, and I'm looking for this girl that handed me this note, because I didn't even see her. I just saw her hand me the note, and I'm like, okay, and I never saw her. I asked around, and they're like, no one has come in the library, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I didn't see Jesus in a natural, but that's how I experienced, in a cliche way. Right. That's how I experienced God. But not even then did that make me turn my ways. I think definitely it dissuaded me from ever thinking about from, well, not ever, because I feel like suicidal thoughts are one of those things where, being as negative as I was, I dealt for a couple more years.
Yeah.
But I never got to the point of actually taking action like that one time. So after that, even though that was very impactful for my life, and I still carry, well, I don't carry it, but I still have a note with me. I think I was proud. In my pride, I was like, I can. I mean, yes, he gave his life for me, and according to this note, he loves me, and according to a lot of people, he loves us. But I still can't get past that. I couldn't fathom that someone as loving and as merciful as he was, why did I still go through whatever I did, and why are people just roaming around like nothing, without being punished?
Right.
And so what I did after that was that I made it sort of like a point to not involve myself with anything that had to do with God.
Right.
And it was even bothersome to hear my mom saying things like, well, you need to pray. It was like, and es que todo está en las manos de Dios. And like, really? Like, really? And so, it came to the point where it was just rebellion. It was just rebellion. I just acted out of rebellion. So hace cuenta que si decían no esto, I will do the opposite. God no le gusta eso, pues anda tú, hazlo opuesto. However, as much as a rebel, as much as a rebel, how do I word that? As much rebellion as I wanted to show, I still had parameters. I still had lines of resistance that I wasn't going to cross. And also it helped that I was very that I was very cynical about people, and I was very cynical about myself, so that kept me away from a lot of experience. For example, I know you mentioned you had your experiences at church with boys and stuff like that. I never had experiences with boys, because for me it was always like, at first it was, I don't deserve it. I can't desire that because I know I don't deserve it. Then when I sort of tried to come out of that those thoughts, it was more like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I don't think that's a good idea. I should focus on studying. I should focus on school. I should focus on what I really am good at. And so now, 28 years later, but so to me, I did the opposite. Yeah. I stayed away from boys. I stayed away from relationships. I stayed away even from friends, which is why even till now I have very little friends. Like, I have a very small group of friends because I stood away from I became very good at making superficial relationships. Yeah. Whereas, like, how can you benefit me? That was a way of me making friends. How can you benefit me? Yeah. How can it wasn't as selfish, because it was kind of like, how can I benefit you as well? It needs to be a win-win situation. And then
I benefit,
but obviously I'm looking for the greater benefit. Right. And then I took a class again because I was just doing everything out of rebellion. I mean, I had my ears pierced, but I got like 3 more piercings, just because, okay, God doesn't like that, and let me get more piercings, and I mean, I was a really broken person, yeah. And my way of showing how broken I was, or my way of telling God, this is you, this is your result, in a way, it was that. It was, I was basically rebelling. If I really think about it, it's like a teenager rebelling with his or her parents, or to his or her parents. So anyway, I'm taking this class about world religions. Obviously, in my head, I started this class because of, okay, I want to know their religions. Maybe other religions can satisfy me. It was, oh my God, I cringe every time I think of how narrow-minded I was to think that other religions or other gods would do me better,
Right.
And I'm going through this class, and this professor, obviously, you could first day you could tell right away, atheist. There was nothing about this guy that screamed, "Oh, you know, I have like agnostic at least." No. This way was straight, like there is nothing. And it was very interesting. I think again, God was always calling me. God was always, and it was funny because every time I would go to church, they would always ask people who wants to get baptized, and I'm like, what is this? Like, like, and it was. I don't think I've ever told pastor, but there was a point in my life where I really thought, like, every time he would say that, I felt like he was looking at me. I was like, does he want me to like raise my hand? Like, exactly. And I remember I would avoid eye contact. I would be like, okay, like I don't think he's speaking to me. But that's what I mean by God. I always knew. You
personalized it, even though it's a general statement.
I mean, he does it till this day. You know, not that he has to, but obviously as a pastor, he wants to know. Hey, like, who knows? Maybe this is the service where you really got convicted and you just want to get baptized. But obviously, I took it as mine because that's just how much God was trying to call me and how much resistance I was trying to give him. I'm like, no, and it's really not for me. And it wasn't for me, but I took it that way because he was just calling me and I didn't want to give in. But anyway, I digressed. So I'm taking this class, and this teacher is very, very passionate about pretty much saying God doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. Christianity is just a lie. And here's Buddhism, or here's, this, or here's that, or whatever. And, I learned so much during that class, but...
Coexist.
But it started doing the opposite in me. It started doing... Because, again, I grew up Christian. I grew up exactly with my mom reading us Bible stories. I grew up hearing of the Garden of Eden. I grew up hearing of El Jarro Sin Fondo. That was our favorite story, Kelly and I. It's just like, nunca se acabó el vino, So I don't know why that was her favorite story.
Aceite, ¿qué no?
Aceite, right? Yeah, no era vino, no era aceite. Anyway, and it was an illustrated Bible, so it was just exciting. So anyway, so he's saying all these things, and I'm like, okay, and I don't know if it was again my rebellious nature that I had acquired, but every time this professor or this teacher would say something, it's like, no, I don't agree with that. I don't think so. I don't. That doesn't sound right.
Completely accepting everything.
I started questioning it, and then interestingly enough, I started reading the Bible in a way of like, I don't know if that's what's going on here, because
you were fact checking.
Yes, I was fact checking this guy, and I'm like,
the very book you don't believe in.
Yeah, exactly. And then when I started reading the Bible, to just sort of like just say, oh well, that was not right, or that was not how you said it, and or you don't have your data right, or whatever. I started thinking, oh, okay, well, I think it's not that I never believed. I wanted to make myself not believe. Yeah. So when I started reading the Bible, it was like, okay, okay. And obviously you start thinking things like, I started thinking, how can God do the flood? Like, come on, So that was my way of sort of pushing myself to not believe it. Yeah, to push myself to not believe it. Like, come on, like, really, a flood everywhere? Or what was another story that was just like, Job's story. Oh. That to me spoke volumes. That to me was like, how could God allow that to happen to this guy? And obviously, as a hurt person, you hang on to the hurt in all of that situation. You don't realize that at the end, God restored him. God gave him even greater numbers. You don't stay with that. I stayed with. He allowed the devil to do this to him. He allowed this. He allowed that. I mean, poor guy. He suffered everything. This guy probably went through all the types of trauma there are. And so that was another story where I was like, see, that's the God I shouldn't believe in. See, that exactly what I'm talking about. Like, come on, And so I think I try to give rationale and logic to the Bible. And little did I know is that my brain is not prepared for what the truth is, right? My brain is not, our brain as humans, it can't quantify what God is. And what we have as a guide is the Bible. And unfortunately, the Bible had to be written by men, for men, right? So we need to understand. I mean, it was inspired by God, but still, there's a lot of things that we'll never be able to really understand, really comprehend, because
it's a hard thing to accept.
Yes.
Like, how can I explain God?
Yes, because there are things that don't need to be. They don't need to, or at least that's what I came to terms with. Like, I don't need to have the explanation if the flood was possible or not. You know, my brain might want to, because my brain works like that. My brain in its low capacity wants some, reason. But the truth of the matter is God does things whether you understand it or not.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, so that happened in college. Then I transferred schools, and I went to Cal State LA. And that one was another whole odyssey, because now it was okay. So I'm starting to believe again. I'm starting to have faith. No, not faith, but I'm starting to believe again. I'm starting to desire. Well, no. Sorry. Let me move back a little bit. So, because of cosas del destino, cosas de Dios, I had to spend around 8 months to 9 months in Mexico, and I lived with a tia for those 8 to 9 months. But my tia was very practical. My tia was very, like, I think she taught me how to ride the transportation for like 2 days, and after that she's like, you're on your own. We can provide you with a job, but other than that, like, you need to navigate the public transportation on your own, and you need to navigate your own job on your own. And so pretty much you were thrown out. I was thrown out there. After having lived for a lot of years in the U.S., where mom would ride me to school, ride me to the store, where I spent that was I had already done a one year in college, so I was already driving myself to college. I was already sort of like in charge of, or independent, in a way. So now I go over there and it's like, I don't know how to ride the transportation, me da miedo. Todo mundo, and it was interesting because everyone knew that I wasn't from there. It's like, ¿de dónde eres? Que tu acento y quién sabe qué. And over here is the same thing. Where are you from? Your accent, so exotic. I'm like, Mexico? There's your exoticism. And so eso me dio más miedo todavía. El que la gente, because I was like, people can tell where I'm from. People can tell that I'm not from here. And then sometimes when you walk in Mexico, I don't know about here, but in Mexico, when you walk into a neighborhood that they know you're not from there, you're an easy target. Mm-hmm. So that was like that. And I remember calling my sisters, and Adriana would be like, no, camina como si tú fueras de ahí, y con tu cara arriba, y no andes de mensa con la cara ahí en el piso, y como, porque luego te van a querer hacer algo, y yo, no, okay. And so that would give me a little bit more pressure of like, okay, tengo que caminar así, so whatever. So during that time, I felt very desolate. I felt very angry again, because once again, just when I was starting to believe, I was like, why am I here? Why did you allow this to happen?
Yeah.
How, like, this wasn't a choice of mine either. Just like the rest of the things that I experienced, they weren't my choice. Why do I have to live with the consequences when they weren't my choices? So, obviously, I would speak to my tia about it, and my tia was very much like, la vida así es. Like, I couldn't escape my mom, in a way, because my tia was just like a double of my mom. I'm like, okay, tia. And, at least with my mom, I would have been like, no, pero, I would have still fought it or whatever. But with my tia, I was like, yes, tia, I get it. Así es la vida. And then whatever. And so I started reading a Purpose-Driven Life.
Yeah.
That book helped a lot. That book helped tons, because I feel like I really took refuge in that. I really took refuge in, like, there was a passage there, and I know some people have their own opinions about that book. But there is a passage there that I think it helped me a lot during the time, that it says you can be mad at God. You are allowed to be upset with God. You know, Jonás was upset with God. You know, and not just upset, but he even disobeyed him. Like, it's like, okay, I'm not gonna do that because I know what you're gonna do, so I'm gonna go the opposite way. You know, and so obviously, God later said, well, you know, I'm gonna teach you a lesson.
Yeah.
But de todas maneras, this book really taught me, like, okay, no matter how bad I feel, God is still God at the end of the day, and I can't tell him what to do. You know, I can't even well, rather, I can tell him what to do. I think we all do at some points. God, do this, God, do that, you know. But no porque yo pida quiere decir que él va a responder.
Right.
Let alone que va a responder in the way I asked him to do it. Right. So that book taught me a lot of, like, God is so much bigger than what you can comprehend, that's why you get frustrated when things don't happen your way, or when things don't happen in a just way.
Yeah.
Because we think that we all should be living lives, good lives and happy lives, and that's not the truth.
Yeah.
That's not the truth. And so during that time, again, it was very like, okay. So I worked in a relationship with God. I worked in feeling some type of joy despite my situation, and I think at some points I managed it, and at some points I didn't. At some points I didn't achieve joy. So I do think that if I really now that I look back at it, I feel like I failed for a lot of that prueba, because despite reading that, and despite having realized that I needed a relationship with God, I was still very proud. I was still very like, why do things keep happening to me? You know, right when I'm about to get up, it just seemed like I was thrown another one, you know, to sort of like keep me there. But obviously now I know it was all up to my attitude. It had nothing to do with my surroundings or my situations. It had everything to do with how I would take those situations. And anyway, so I come back. I do another year of college. I transferred to Cal State LA, and then in Cal State LA it was like, yes, I'm on my own, because I actually lived in LA.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm on my own. I'm more independent. I can drive now, and you know, whatever. And but again, I was still broken. I was still a broken adult, yes, with more maturity, with more self-awareness, with more intentionality, with more with parameters that I wasn't going to cross. I was very like, okay, I'm not gonna do that. I might not have the strongest relationship with God, but I know what my mom taught me. I know what values I hold dear, and I'm not going to
do that.
I'm not going to break those.
Right.
So I think that's one of the reasons why I feel like God was always calling me, because I was still trying to be íntegra. De todas maneras, traté de dar un buen ejemplo, o traté de darle honra a mi mamá. And so during college, I think I completely forgot to say another story, but anyway, so during university, I my first year of university, I didn't do much, but my second year of university, we moved with Kelly to live to North Hollywood. And I think that's when we really, both of us, we sort of sought refuge in God, because we were living together and we were so different from each other. We were very, very different from each other. I was, and then back then Kelly had a condition that we didn't know she had, and a lot of the symptoms were obvious and were things that limited her and limited me. So it was a battle uphill for both of us. I'm a very impatient person. Or I'm trying to not be as impatient, but back then I was very impatient with her. I was very impatient with her process, and I think that only added fuel to the fact that we were so different. We are so different. But I think we managed to work out a relationship where we're both mature about fighting or disagreeing, having a conversation where it's okay, I don't like when you do this. All right, perfect. Then how can I fix it? Help me fix things. Help me help you. Help me love you, and vice versa. And so there were a lot of conversations where she literally had to tell me, I don't need your advice. I just want you to listen. Like, okay, fine, I'll listen. And I feel I feel like you had to live through some of that, because the way my brain works is that if you don't tell me what you want, I can't figure it out sometimes. Sometimes I figure it out, and I'm good at okay, then is this it? But a lot of the times it's like, well, if you don't say anything, then how am I supposed to know?
Right.
And so I think I learned that from Kelly. I learned that I need to be told, ¿qué es lo que quieres? Porque I don't like it when people hold my reaction against me, and they're like, well, it's because you didn't know this. Exactly. I didn't know what you were going through, and for you to hold me accountable for something that I said without knowing. Yes, I get it, but I don't think it works for either of us, because now I feel like crap, but you probably feel worse because I said it without knowing, and now you're trying to justify yourself with, well, I was going through this. I'm like, yes, but if you didn't tell me what you were going through, and I spoke what I spoke, and now you're hurt, why stay on that when it's obvious that the whole issue was because because I didn't know? Yeah. So from now on, you need to tell me, so I don't speak, or so I don't react, or so I don't behave in a certain way. And she understood that. She's like, oh, okay, I see. And that's how you work. I'm like, yeah, that's how it works.
So you were changing during this season of your life.
Yeah, oh, definitely. We were both changing. We started going to church in North Hollywood, a Christian church. I don't remember the pastor's name, but we would go there, and very interesting. I remember that despite going to a different church, a church that they didn't know me, I felt very uncomfortable not wearing my veil. I felt very uncomfortable not wearing my veil. And this coming from the person that I wanted nothing to do with the church, or the church. At that point, I wanted a relationship with God, but to me, the church had been such a disappointment that I really thought, no, as long as I have a relationship with God, why should I go to church? Yeah, like, I'm working on my relationship with God. What's it to people? But my mom was.
That is a very. I'm sorry to interrupt. That's a very, like, I think, Christian woke mindset. Yes. There's such thing as wokeness in the church, and that is so common to hear of, like, I don't have to go to church to have a relationship with God, and all that comes with.
Yeah, no, I don't know about whoever thinks that way, but I later realized how wrong of me that was. But anyway, that day was very interesting because we go in there and Kelly's like, whatever, Kelly's like, okay, we're here, my mom asked us to be, let's please her, let's go to church. She's gonna ask. She's been telling us for, like, we had been in North Hollywood for like almost 4 months, And every time, ya fueron a la iglesia, ya fueron a la iglesia. No, ma, no, ma. Y literally estaba like 5 minutes away from us. Like, we had no excuse.
Yeah.
And so finally we go, and Kenny is, and I'm feeling very uncomfortable. I'm feeling like, oh my God, I shouldn't have worn this. And I wasn't, it's not that I was wearing like, oh my God, a mini skirt or whatever. No, but to me it was just like, because this was a very apostolic church. I mean, the culture was just different.
Yeah.
The culture was just different. I mean, women were, all of them had their hair up to their, their waist, or down to their waist. They had their skirts all the way
Down to their ankles.
And it was just like, oh, okay, long veils, white veils, and so it was like, oh my God. And I didn't even have a tortillita, those veils that literally just cover your, like, the top of your head. I didn't even have that. So I remember I went in and I felt so uncomfortable, and before going in, they were selling veils. I'm like, I'm gonna go buy one. And I went and I bought one, and I put it on, and it was just like, oh, okay. Okay. So that feeling, later on I went home and I thought, why did I feel that way that I felt? I mean, wasn't I so strongly against even going to church?
Yeah.
Like, why, and at this point, I had 4 ear piercings. I had tattoos. I had gotten tattoos. So to me, it's like, I've done what's the worst. Why do I felt so improper to be without a veil? And so I wrestled with that idea for a while. And then I thought, next time I'm not gonna put it, even if I feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to do it. I think we went a couple more times, and then after that we're like, okay, let's call it quits. My mom hasn't asked about it, like, whatever. So we stopped going to the church. We were still living in North Hollywood, but I think we lived in North Hollywood for like another year and a half. I graduated, Kelly graduates, and then we moved back. Now I'm back, and I'm very desperate for a job. I'm very desperate to get out there and to work. And obviously, I didn't have a lot of experience. So I ended up working at whatever place that could hire me. I worked for the Boys and Girls Club, and that was nice. I worked around a lot of children, and I saw a lot of what I had studied. I had studied for child abuse and family violence. And so I saw a lot of what I studied. I was like, okay, so that was interesting, because I never really liked kids, but I studied.
Yeah.
I studied kids. I did a lot. My last year in university, my service, a whole year of my service in order to receive my diploma, was to be at the children's court in LA. That one was tough. Oh my God. Good thing that I remember, because there were days where I would call my mom and I would be like, I don't want to go back. And it was funny because, so I'm at that point, I'm a recovering negative person, right? I'm a recovering hating all the world person. I'm a recovering of being cynical about the world.
Right.
I have to do this service in the children's court, and I realized parents are disgusting. I realized the world is just as bad as I thought a couple months ago or a couple of years ago.
Right.
I mean, I heard of the atrocities these parents would do to their own children. Adults doing heinous things to children, to defenseless children. And it was just every day. No, I would go twice a week. But the days that I didn't go, I would have to write about it.
Right.
So it was just insane. I thought, man, right when I'm about to get out of this idea that the world is horrible, the world is dangerous, the world is, you shouldn't trust no one, I get thrown into this. Well, not get thrown, because I decided to do my service there. I decide to do my service in the children's court, and it's like one case after another case after another case, and you really get to see the nature of people in there. Because I was in the courts, serving, and I'm like, oh my God, it was draining. I remember I would call my mom, I don't want to do this. People are mean. People are bad. Like, and I remember I said it once, where is God? Why aren't these people all falling dead right now? Like, to me, it just seemed unjust.
Yeah.
And it echoed a lot of what I had lived. Mm-hmm. And so, long story short, my service was only supposed to be for around 8 months, but I stayed there because I really liked. After a while, I really thought I don't know. I don't know, if I'm being honest. I want to say I liked it, but it was so heavy that maybe it was just one of those things where, like, okay, I'm just gonna continue to help.
Right.
But I would only do it once a week at that time because I was also working, and my work hours they increased. But during that time, it was a very hard time because I couldn't see the love of people. And to me, it's like, and because I couldn't see the love, it was just almost like, God, where are you?
Yeah.
¿Dónde estás where this family is going through this? Or ¿dónde estás where when children are going through what they're going through? But I remember my mom once told me this. And she told me, well, hija, la gente va a hacer lo que quiere hacer. O sea, you have no power over what people are going to do. And you need to understand that evil is everywhere.
Yeah.
Evil is everywhere, and it's in the Bible. And my mom starts telling me in Apocalipsis, como dice que los últimos días la gente ya no va a haber ese amor natural. And I'm like, oh my God. And so now my mom starts telling me, no, he is here. He is everywhere. It's just people aren't looking for him. People aren't, and I know that might sound very tone deaf to a lot of people, like, oh, so now it's my fault that I'm not looking for him. So you're telling me that I'm going through this because I'm not, looking for him. And no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, or at least how I lived it was, when I decided to look for him, when I decided that he was indeed everywhere, that's when it really clicked for me. Oh, you've been here all along. All those times that I went to church and pastor was asking, ¿Quién quiere bautizarse? And it felt like he was talking to me. It was you. That one time where I tried to commit suicide and you prevented that. That was you. That one time where I took a college class in the hopes that I would really convince myself to never trust in you, and it did the opposite. That was you. And so I started realizing he's been everywhere. It's just I never opened the door.
Yeah.
I never really took courage. Cause I'm sorry. Cause when you open the door to God, you need to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. You need to be vulnerable to really see yourself how God sees you. And I wasn't ready. I felt like I wasn't ready to realize that he loved me despite everything. I wasn't ready to realize that even though I hated him for so many years, that didn't change a thing about how he felt for me. And he's God. He doesn't need my prayer. He doesn't need my forgiveness or my, okay, God, it's okay. No, he doesn't. He would like it and it'd be nice. But ultimately, I started seeing God how I saw my mom, where she told me, it's up to you. Mm. That's how I started seeing God. It's like, he's there, like my mom. He's always going to be there. But because he gave me free will, it's my responsibility to make sure I behave the way I want to behave. No, not the way I want to behave, but the way
you want to live.
I want to live, right? And I realized, okay, believing in God, or rather giving my life to God, might not take away the experiences, but it definitely helped me see them differently. So obviously, what I lived or what I didn't live, what I experienced or what I didn't experience, that's not going to change. That's in the past. But when I gave my life to God, to Jesus, I realized that the burden of it became less heavy. And it became and it's starting to, and right now I'm crying because I'm overwhelmed of how much love I feel, how much loved I feel by God. But I can talk about a lot of my situations without crying now, because I know that God has restored me from those situations, and I can speak about how He's always been working with me. I just didn't want to see it. I didn't want to realize it because deep down I wasn't ready for that commitment of, okay, God, I know you've been here. I know you gave your life for me. Now how can I serve you? How can I give a little, just a little of the much, much, much you've given me? And I wasn't ready for that because I was broken. Because I thought I need to have something in order to give. You cannot give what you don't have. And I didn't have love, or at least I didn't feel like I had love, like I didn't feel like I had faith. And so once I realized that he had been there all along, and that I could just cling on to him, that made things so much easier. I became happier. I saw big changes in my life. I became very compassionate. I became compassionate. I became understanding. I became less cynical about people. I became, okay, yes, the world is filled with situations where children suffer and people suffer, but it's definitely not God's fault. And I'm not saying it's the people's fault, but in a way, for example, a lot of my suffering was me holding onto it. And I think that a lot of people do that. A lot of people suffer because they still hold on to that. They hold on to the hurt. They hold on to the injustice, or they hold on to all of that. And so in a way, it was my fault. In a way, all those years of realizing that I could do better, that I could mature, blah, 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 blah. Those were meaningless years of self-help, in a way. Those were meaningless years because I still held on to hurt. I was still hurting. I was still broken. It wasn't when I gave my life to God where I really realized I can't let this go.
Yeah.
I can't let this hurt go, and I can move past that without invalidating the woman they turned me into. And I think I don't know if I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned it, but I really realized my identity is in my past. My identity is not me being a victim. My identity is in Christ. I'm a child of God, and as such, I should behave a certain way. As such, I should give honor and glory to the one and only who has restored me for a lot of my aches and a lot of my emotional baggage, really. And so I think
That's how you're different.
Yeah.
That's how you are different because of your faith.
Yes, I think and obviously my testimony, I had a one event where that was not turning back after that.
Right.
But I think throughout my whole life, God has always been there and has always worked behind the scenes. But during that event, during that encuentro, that's when I really realized, yes, he's been behind the scenes, but he's always present as well. Yeah. He's not in my past, like, oh, he was calling me here, or he was calling me there, or he prevented this here, or whatever. No, he's also here today, right now. Yes. And because he's here today, right now, do you want to receive him in your life or no? And I said, pues, yeah, I have nothing else to lose. You know, I think that day I really I made up my mind of, obviously I can't go back to my past, so I can't change that. I don't know what the future holds, so that's uncertain también. I only have today, and if today I can be happy for just a little bit, I can, sorry, and if today I can taste a little of that joy that everyone's talking about, then why not? And I think that's how it happened to me. And after that, it took me a while to get baptized. After that, I think it took me 6 months, because I wanted it to be on my birthday. And then after that, I was like, okay, no, so and so tío couldn't make it, so let's push it to the following Sunday. But those 6 months,
it solidified.
Yes, it only became clear as time went by that that's what I wanted. It wasn't out of the emotion from having come out of that experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't because I was just so elated with, oh my God, yes, I had a taste of that joy and God loves me. No, it wasn't that. It was a conscious decision. Yeah. I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to look back. I'm really going to commit myself to God and to a righteous life. The pursuit of a righteous life, because I don't know if you ever achieve that, but you pursue it. And I think I became very my skills that I had developed up to that point on my own, in a way,
yeah,
they helped me, because I became intentional about, okay, I'm seeking God with intention, you know. And right, how can I treat others now? How can I be less cynical, you know? And so now I became all those the skill set that I developed, like being intentional, being self-aware, being looking for balance and moderation. Those helped me, because when I got baptized, to me that wasn't like it's out of emotion. No, this is what I intended to do. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to follow through. Yeah. I'm going to run my race and end it with God. And I think it's worked out for me to have found God later on in the years and not early on. However, I wouldn't say that it works for a lot of people. I wouldn't say that, like, for example, if a teenager wants to get baptized, hey, you know, welcome, you know, do it, yeah, for sure. So even though even though I got baptized later on in life, I don't think I would say that to people, like, oh, right, wait until you're this or that. No, like, as long as you know you're doing a conscious decision. And I think it's possible when you're a child. And also, I think sometimes finding an earlier relationship with God is better than waiting until you're much broken. And, you know, because I feel like for me it took years, because I couldn't let go of a lot of things. But I knew deep down, I knew that I was going to go back. I was going to go back to my first love as a child. So yeah, sorry, it got so emotional out of nowhere. But again, I want to reiterate, it's just I'm amazed.
Yeah.
You know, it amazes me how much God loves us, and how you can change as a person.
Yeah.
You know, how you can change, and how you can start seeing the world very, very different. And when you have a relationship with God, because again, I feel like I've experienced a lot of things that can discourage people from believing in God.
Yeah.
But now the way I see things is very different from when I was there. And that amazes me. Yes. That amazes me, of like, man, si esto no es bueno, I don't know what is. You know, if this isn't from God, if this isn't good, then I don't know what is. And then that's one of the reasons why sometimes when people say, oh, I don't believe, it's like, you need to believe in something, and it better be God, because if you believe in anything else, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Right.
you're setting yourself up for disappointment after disappointment after
People
disappointment.
will fail you.
Yeah.
Family will fail you.
Yeah. Versus when you're with God, is like, I mean, just look at my life, you know. Every time I was looking to be disappointed, and sure, you know, in a human way, I was. But when I really think about it, it's like, no.
Yeah.
You know, he was never disappointing. He was never, because he's God.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm seeing things through my small-minded, you know, human brain. And obviously, that's never gonna work out. So, yes, that was my testimony. And again, I think I want to piggyback on what you said. I'm still not perfect.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't think you ever achieve that.
No.
But I'm definitely striving to be better. I'm striving to be a woman of much greater faith. I'm trying to be possibly a wife, a wife that, like you know, that takes care of her home, that knows how to defend her home, you know, and pues una mujer de valor, una mujer de honor, y que traiga gloria a su hogar, que traiga gloria y honra a Dios por medio de, you know, how she handles herself, how she behaves. And a veces me falla, porque obviously todavía tengo Lula dentro de mí, todavía tengo, you know, my mom, a lot of that también, my grandma was such a, I mean, de alguien tenían que sacar mis tíos y mi mamá esa like de decir las cosas como son. So my grandma was just on another level, on another whole level. And so, de vez en cuando también se me sale mi abuelita, mi mamá Pachita. Entonces, I'm still wrestling with that. I'm still, you know, trying to, on my way to not be perfect, although as Christians, we're looking for perfection in Christ, or righteousness, I say, but to be, to just behave in a way that I know won't
that
bring me
God.
Yeah, that would honor God and that won't bring me shame.
Yeah, for sure. I think at the core of what we were trying to share in our testimonies more than anything is, one, it's definitely a journey. You know, every person that comes to Jesus has a very different journey, and you know, in Lula's case, you know, it was her whole life, and she made a decision, and then, you know, for me, I made a decision very early on, and then it still took me years to really understand what that meant. And so for those of you that have made that decision and maybe have walked away, maybe you are very good at playing church, maybe you have a superficial relationship with God, we definitely encourage you to be honest with yourself. You know, I know that in church sometimes it's hard to be vulnerable and it's hard to really show like this is a front, but it's in that vulnerability, it's in that honesty that you can actually decide if this is what you really, really want to do. And obviously that is something that we're preaching, it's something where we're promoting. Yes, having a relationship with God is extremely beneficial to your life. I mean, not in a necessarily material way, although there's always blessing in that as well, but it's more of, you know, your life is never going to be the same. You know, you can live a life that God intended for you to live. And so if you have walked away from God, let this be the reminder, let this be that little hook that, like Lula, God was always there. God was always reaching out, but it's always a personal decision. And if you've never tried Jesus, if you've never had a relationship with God, and you are interested, for sure, comment and subscribe and let us know and we'll get you connected. But the point of this podcast isn't try God so that, you know, everything good can come to you and that you're never going to go through anything again. And that's not that. It's more of you have a relationship with God so that you can face it with God, so that God could be by your side, so that your perspective could change, so that you could become a different person. And I think sometimes in our lives we are so comfortable with the person that we are that we don't realize that change is actually good. Having a different kind of mindset is actually good. And so we're going to go ahead and close with a prayer if you want to lead us. And like we said, if you are interested in knowing more about God, church, having a relationship with God, please feel free to contact us. But also know that we're praying for all our listeners, and that we hope that even if all you got was just two very different journeys and experiences, well, great. You got a really good story. So we're going to go ahead and pray.
Yes, I'm going to do it in Spanish. And I feel inspired today. Señor Jesús, muchas gracias por este momento. Gracias por este tiempo, Señor. Gracias porque tú nunca fallas, Padre. Porque tú siempre estás presente en nuestras vidas y en las vidas de los que nos están escuchando, aunque a lo mejor estén pasando por un momento donde ellos no lo ven, donde ellos no lo sientan, Padre. Pero el no sentirlo y no verlo no quiere decir que tú no estés actuando, no quiere decir que tú no estés en sus vidas presente y ministrando de tu amor. Padre, gracias, Señor Jesús, porque nos diste la oportunidad de hablar un poquito sobre cómo tú estuviste en nuestra vida, cómo tú nos diste amor y paciencia y misericordia para también nosotros poder dar un poquito de ese amor, paciencia y misericordia, Señor Jesús. Nosotros estamos aquí, Padre, intentando dar un poquito de lo que tú nos has demostrado a Kesia y a mí, que ha sido compasión y misericordia, Señor Jesús, y perdón y amor. Muchas gracias, Señor, por todos los que nos están escuchando. Te pido, Padre, Señor, que esto sea una pequeña semilla en sus corazones. Si es que no te han buscado, Padre, y si es que ya están en tu camino y están lidiando con una situación donde quizás estén, como dijo Kes en su testimonio, están batallando con estar en la iglesia, con estar en ministerio, con ser líderes quizás, y están batallando con una relación genuina contigo, pues que también, Señor Jesús, seas con ellos, que los bendigas, que llenes sus vidas, que ellos se den cuenta que tú nunca fallas, Padre. El humano va a fallar, nosotros nos vamos a fallar a uno mismo. En la Biblia dice que nuestros corazones son engañosos, Señor Jesús, pero tú nunca fallas, tú eres la verdad, tú eres el verbo al principio, Señor Jesús. Eres el alfa y el omega, Señor. Contigo no somos nada, Señor. Sin ti no somos nada, contigo somos bastante, perdón. Entonces te pido que nos sigas dando esta oportunidad para poder demostrar un poquito de tu amor, demostrar un poquito de tu paciencia, para poder compartir un poquito de lo que tú nos has dado a nosotros, Señor Jesús.
Thank you, Father God, for bringing us here together. And as Lula mentioned, Lord, if there's any listeners right now whose hearts are ready to receive you, God, I pray that you reveal yourself, Lord. I pray that if there's anyone who is struggling with their relationship with you, Lord, that you call them back, that you reveal yourself to them, and they may be willing to be vulnerable and restart and resume their relationship with you, God. We pray blessings over our listeners, and we thank you for consistently pursuing us, God, for opening doors for us, for giving us a new mind and a new heart to see life in a different way, God. We thank you again for this podcast, and we pray that it be a blessing. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Catch you guys later, guys.
Bye.